So what do the results say? So we know from a meta-analysis by Schmidt and Hunter in 1998, shown here in red, that if we know the differences between people in their IQ, we can explain 25% of the differences in their job performance. So differences in IQ can account for about a quarter of the difference in job performance. So they made this estimate based on 32,000 people doing 515 kinds of jobs. So how does emotional intelligence compare to that? We don't have 32,000 people. We have 562 people available to make an estimate about this based on 8 studies. And Dana Joseph and Dan Newman, in that green reference there, they summarised this literature. Here it is. Emotional intelligence explains approximately 3% of the differences in how people perform on their jobs. But wait, you might be thinking, some jobs really don't require much human interaction. Like, there really are jobs where there's just some slob sitting in the back room doing technical stuff, never client-facing, questionable personal hygiene. These people, emotional intelligence is not going to affect how they do their work. And this is something that Dana and Dan considered. So they split the jobs out into those kinds of jobs where, in fact, expressing positive emotions was part of the job. This is referred to as a high emotion labour job, where compared to those kind of jobs where you really don't, it doesn't matter what emotion you express at work. And these are low emotional labour jobs. So when we look at that, we'll see that for these slobs in the back room, there's absolutely no relationship. I can't even see a coloured bar there between emotional intelligence and their performance at work. For the people in high emotion labour jobs, those that have to have service with a smile or something like that, emotional intelligence can explain about 7% of the differences in job performance. However, is emotional intelligence more important than IQ for job performance? No. It's clearly not. And the reason why I harp on this point so much is there's still so many websites that make this claim, that it's still very much in the popular press, and it's just not true. However, moving on, given that this claim is false, is emotional intelligence just a bunch of crap? Is it a fad? I don't think so. I think it's useful for a couple of reasons, which I'll outline. The first one is, even though it looks kind of not great next to intelligence on that graph, explaining 7% of performance is non-trivial. If I can increase my efficiency by 7%, that's equivalent to an additional 3 or 4 weeks per year of work. I can do a lot in an additional 3 weeks of work. I can sell a lot more widgets, or in my field, I can publish a lot more papers if I've got 3 extra weeks to do it in. So 7% is non-trivial. We're all obsessed with saying it has to be better than intelligence. I think it just has to be useful. The second reason why I think this 7% is non-trivial is that there's a lot of complex jobs out there where there really are very little difference between people in terms of IQ. So these are jobs where everyone has to be smart just to do the jobs. When there are no differences between people in IQ, pretty much, then you can't explain differences in their job performance in terms of differences in their IQ, because there are none. And these jobs, other things, explain job performance. So for example, in a job where everybody's smart, but some people are actually also able to carry on a conversation and smile at people and be reasonable in terms of social skills as a manager, they're going to do a lot better, even though they're just as smart. So for jobs where there are no differences in IQ, where that 25% just disappears, you still need other things to explain differences in job performance. The second thing that I wanted to get to is possibly a controversial statement to make while my boss is in the audience, but job performance is not the be-all and end-all It's not the most important thing in life. Most people are also interested in outcomes in their personal life, like being able to cope with stress and feeling happy and self-fulfilled. So emotional intelligence does a better job at explaining these things than it does at explaining job performance. So in my research, I've found that differences in emotional intelligence, specifically in emotion management, explain 10 to 15% of the differences in how well people can cope with stress. Also, differences in emotional intelligence, again in that highest branch, emotion management, can explain nearly 1/3 of the differences in well-being. And I've specified that this is eudaimonic well-being, which is the type of well-being associated with optimum psychological function, reaching your goals. So not just being generally happy, but feeling that you're sort of self-actualised, that you're going somewhere. And this is important. So before I summarise, I wanted to talk about some of the new directions in emotional intelligence. So I've kept saying that there's only one test out there commercially available, and that's the Mesquite, the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. But there's a few things in the hopper that may come out in the next few years. One of them is these tasks from the emotion recognition ability literature. So here's an example from Tanja Banziger and colleagues at the Swiss Centre for Effective Sciences. So they measure how well people can recognise emotions from facial expressions, vocal expressions and body language. And here I've got some examples of test items looking at whether you can recognise emotions purely from tone of voice. So there's someone who just simply talks nonsense syllables but does so in a particular emotional tone. So you're ready to test your emotion recognition ability? Here we go. What do you think of these emotions? Yes. Yes, it is fear. Very bold.
Het zandig pom juvenci. Het zandig pom juvenci.
So what do we think that is? Yeah, it's anger. It sounds a bit irritable. So another area where emotion recognition ability studies have come up with ways to measure these sorts of abilities is Paul Ekman's work on facial expression recognition. So there's a task called the Japanese and Caucasian Brief Affect Recognition Test. This is based on testing whether you can recognise micro-expressions of emotion. So micro-expressions occur when someone's trying to hide how they really feel, but they let a little bit of information leak out. And this is known as emotional leakage. So it is. So one of the ways that these emotional expressions leak out is through these micro-expressions. So you might feel really angry and try and control it on your face, but you let out a micro-expression of anger. So being able to recognise these micro-expressions can be very important to understanding how someone really feels. And Paul Ekman's starting to build a little bit of an empire around this in terms of training tools. And this sort of research is also the loose basis for the television program Lie to Me. So I'm just going to show you some examples now, and hopefully the technology works, of whether you can recognise these micro-expressions. So let's have a look.